So now we're going to deal with a personal favourite of mine, which is Mametz Wood by Owen Sheers. I love this poem. I think it's beautiful. So he went to visit in 2005 the site of the Battle of this wood. So he made a journey, and as you will remember, it was part of the Battle of the Somme, 1916. So it's a poem about the consequences of a World War One battle. So obviously you've got Dulce as a startling comparison there. So the 38th Welsh Division, and obviously Sheers is a Welsh poet, suffered heavy losses in the battle. They tried to take that wood, you know, there was a huge loss of life over a very, very small piece of land, and they were hugely outnumbered. And you have that idea of the nesting machine guns, which is incredibly powerful, I think. So Sheers saw the grave, and he actually described it as it burned into his mind, and he decided he was going to write about that at some point in the future, because he saw the grave and he noted that someone had taken the time to bury these soldiers linked arm in arm, giving them some dignity in death. But then their graves were lost, and it wasn't until the farmers started to tend the land back to itself, that idea of a healing process, that the earth gave up its dead. So he describes the socketed heads, skeletons paused mid-dance macabre, and I know you've all seen that image of that medieval dance of death. So he wrote the poem to remind people of the consequences, the horror and the futility of war. So the poem deals with memory. He's remembering the soldiers through this poem. They are recreated through this poem, songs they might have sung. In fact, he almost gives them the song that might have come from their tongues through this poem. It's obviously about loss of life in war. It's violence, and it gives a real sense of time and place. So, structurally, there are 6 stanzas of 3 lines. Three-line stanza is called a tercet, and it is a rigid structure. Now, again, this is all interpretation. There's no absolute certain answer to any of this. So it could be to reflect the organisation of military life, perhaps. Possibly that war continues to happen without us actually learning anything from it, perhaps. But there are some very, very long lines and some shorter lines, so the structure is quite interesting in that poem. The language of the poem, rich in imagery, and it certainly reflects the vulnerability of those soldiers. And we've got that beautiful, fragile imagery that we were talking about that could link it to Manhunt, the china plate of a shoulder blade, something fragile, something delicate, the broken bird's egg of a skull. And I think the particularly poignant image for me was the fact that their boots outlasted them. Obviously Owen talks about limping on bloodshot, so those soldiers have lost their boots, but it gives a sense of innocence and vulnerability. These boys were so young, and that they hadn't been in battle, but below the ground, that the leather of their boots had outlasted those soldiers. Very, very poignant. Obviously there is a lot more we could say about the poem, but we're trying to keep them short, snappy, so we're going to move to the links. We've got Dulce, and then in Dulce we've got loss, violence and the presentation of war. I've tried to make some links through this presentation. The soldier contrasts to Brooke's more positive view of the effects of war, but obviously if you look at perspective, the soldier is told from the perspective of a soldier who was there. Sheers is looking back on this. Both of them deal with the idea of graves. Both of them deal with what happens to people when they die, but there are other points about the soldier and Mametz Wood, and I have an essay on this if you want it, so just come and see me in A108 and I'll give you a copy of the essay. The manhunt and a wife in London can be linked to Mametz Wood for the consequences of war and also the images of vulnerability. And it can also link to London, tentatively I suppose, through a sense of time and place.